Jaime's grin turned razor-thin. "Oh, I pray every day, bastard." Jon stepped back, signaled for the guard to lock the cell again. "I'll be back tomorrow," Jon said. "Mind your tone." He turned and left, his heartbeat thudding. Jaime's words swirled in his mind. "Or we all kill each other." Could that be the final outcome? A wave of bleakness passed over him. A day later, the first outriders Bolton had sent returned with news. Tywin's forces were on the move, marching steadily along the main road that cut through the western riverlands, presumably heading for Riverrun. They numbered at least 15,000, maybe more, including cavalry, pikes, and crossbowmen. Roose Bolton's men had launched small raids on the baggage train, but Tywin remained unshaken. The Lannisters advanced carefully, not leaving themselves open to ambush. Ned grimly decreed that all civilians in outlying villages be warned to evacuate and seek shelter behind Riverrun's walls or flee east. The castle bustled with refugees, farmers, millers, fisherfolk. Anxiety mounted as days ticked by without any new raven from King's Landing. Catelyn hardly slept, pacing the corridors, waiting for news of Sansa. Arya trailed Ned or Robb, her face set in permanent worry. Jon sometimes found her practicing in the yard until her arms shook. She was no longer the bright-eyed girl who only wanted to show off her swordsmanship. She was driven by fear and anger. Autumn storms rolled in, soaking the fields and roads, turning them muddy. This slowed Tywin's progress but also hindered Bolton's cavalry raids. The tension coiled ever tighter. The daily war councils turned more urgent, as Ned and Robb planned for a siege. The courtyard filled with sharpened stakes, siege engines, stockpiles of arrows. Jon joined the archers on the ramparts, practicing from vantage points so he could help repel an assault. On the 6th day after sending their letter to King's Landing, the watchers on the western battlements spotted a figure on horseback galloping toward Riverrun's gates under a white flag. The rider wore the armor of a Lannister outrider, battered and mud-splattered. At once, the guards bristled, longbows trained on the approach. Ned and Robb rushed to the walls, joined by Catelyn, Arya, and Jon. The man in Lannister armor halted out of arrow range, shouting for parley. Robb narrowed his eyes. Could this be a trick? Tywin might want to draw us out or gauge our defenses. Ned studied the rider from atop the battlements, pressing a hand to the stone merlin. "We'll see. Let him approach alone if he seeks parley. Keep the gates barred. I'll speak to him from the walls." A horn signaled the rider that he was allowed to advance. The man nudged his horse forward across the muddy plain, watery sunlight glinting off dented steel. Once he was near enough to be heard but not to do harm, he lifted his visor. His face was gaunt, stubbled, wearing an expression of fatigue and wary determination. "Hail, Riverrun," he called. "I come under flag of truce from Lord Tywin Lannister, with a message for Lord Eddard Stark." Ned braced on his crutch, leaning over the battlement. "I am Eddard Stark. Speak your message." The rider swallowed. "Lord Tywin says, release Ser Jaime Lannister at once, or we shall lay siege to Riverrun. None shall leave, none shall enter. We will burn every village in the Riverlands until my son is returned. We shall see if your daughter is saved by threats alone." Catelyn's sharp gasp carried on the wind. Arya's fists curled at her side. Ned's gaze hardened. "Is that all he says?" The rider hesitated. "He also says, we know you hold Jaime. We hold your girl in King's Landing, but that is the Queen's matter. I care only for my son. Give him back or watch your castle starve. Winter is coming, indeed." A hush fell on the battlements. Rain dripped from the stone edges, pattering on Ned's cloak. Finally, Ned spoke in a clear, loud voice. "Tell Lord Tywin that we have already stated our terms. We will exchange Jaime for Sansa. If he will not free my daughter, then Jaime remains our prisoner. And if Sansa is harmed, your precious Kingslayer dies. That is final." The rider shifted in the saddle, clearly uneasy. "I only carry Lord Tywin's words, my lord. If you refuse, he will proceed with the siege at once." Ned narrowed his eyes. "Then let him try. You'll find us no easy prey." The rider bowed stiffly. I'll bring your words back. May the gods have mercy on us all." He turned his horse, galloping away into the gloom. Robb let out a harsh breath. So it begins. Tywin's threat of total war. Catelyn's face was ashen. He doesn't mention Sansa's safety. That's left to Cersei. He's purely fixated on Jaime. Ned clenched his jaw. Then we must brace ourselves. Tywin will come, and soon. Indeed, within hours, a black-hulled boat rode upriver with the Tully scouts, reporting that Tywin's vanguard was only a day's march away. The storms had slowed them, but not enough. They might attempt to encircle Riverrun from multiple angles, using the fords. If the Riverlords had not destroyed certain key crossings, Tywin would be able to station men all around the fortress. That evening, the Starks conferred in Ned's chamber for a final check on the defenses. The air felt tense, every breath weighed down by the knowledge that tomorrow could bring the Lannisters in force. "We have archers on every tower," Robb said. "Oil casks are readied, the drawbridges prepared to lift at a moment's notice. The castle can close itself off with portcullises. We can withstand a lengthy siege, if that's Tywin's plan." Ned sat in a high-backed chair, leg propped, wincing from the throbbing pain. "Supplies are the issue. We have enough for a decent span, but not indefinite, especially with the refugees. We can ration, but we must be strict." Catelyn paced by the shuttered window. If only we had more time, or a chance to rescue Sansa before Tywin's lines tighten. Arya lingered near the bed, arms crossed. "We can't just watch them surround us. It makes me sick." Ned's eyes rested on her, sorrowful. "War is sickness, Arya, but we do what we must to keep you all alive." Jon stood by the fireplace, the crackle of flames warming his side. What if Tywin attacks right away? The moat, the rivers, he might try to cross them with siege towers, rafts, or something else. The Tully defenses are strong, but not unbreakable. Robb answered, "We'll meet any direct assault with archers, flaming arrows, pitch, and the walls themselves. Riverrun stands at the confluence. Tywin can't easily sail up large war galleys. It's too shallow for most. He might try to starve us out with a siege. Then the only question is how soon he grows impatient, and whether King's Landing's next letter offers any hope for Sansa. The possibility that no letter would arrive at all hung unspoken in the air. Perhaps they would kill Sansa to force Ned's hand, or perhaps Cersei was too cunning to do that yet. Or maybe they were stalling for time, letting Tywin crush Ned. Jon forced the darkest thoughts aside, focusing on the immediate threat, the Lannister host. Eventually, Ned dismissed everyone except Catelyn, wanting time alone with his wife. Arya lingered at the threshold, then retreated. Jon, sensing her anxiety, followed her down the corridor. She walked stiffly, head lowered, until they reached a balcony that overlooked the courtyard. There, the wind buffeted them, and torches flickered below. Arya gripped the balustrade. "I feel so helpless," she muttered. "All the training in the world, and I can't do anything about Sansa. And soon we'll be stuck in here, pinned by Tywin." Jon placed a hand on the cold stone. "Father and Robb are doing everything they can. The war will decide many things. But it won't last forever, Aerie." She stared out at the dark battlements. Bran's still in Winterfell, crippled. Sansa's in King's Landing, hostage. Rickon's just a baby, probably confused why we're all gone. It's all wrong. Jon's heart squeezed. He recalled the warmth of Winterfell's halls, the quiet snows, the sense of belonging he'd sometimes felt there. "We'll get them all back together someday," he said, though his voice betrayed uncertainty. "We're Starks. Winter can't last forever." She nodded, tears glinting in her eyes, but said nothing more. Night slid into a restless dawn. Rain pelted the ramparts, making footing treacherous. A mist rose from the rivers, wrapping Riverrun in a clammy shroud. Soldiers cursed under breath, shifting in their damp cloaks. Up in the watchtowers, horns waited to be sounded if the enemy appeared. Shortly after sunrise, the horns did indeed blow. Tywin's vanguard materialized out of the western haze. Columns of men with lion-crested banners, spears bristling. Scouts counted at least 3,000 in the front lines alone. More swelled behind them, including clusters of knights in polished armor. The Lannister flags burned scarlet against the gray dawn. From Riverrun's walls, the defenders peered anxiously. Archers strung bows, ballista crews readied bolts. Robb and the Blackfish climbed a watchtower for a better view. Ned tried to join them, but his leg gave him trouble on the slick steps, so he remained in the courtyard. Maester Vyman hovered anxiously by his side. Catelyn stood with him, gripping his arm. Jon took position on the ramparts near the gatehouse, scanning the approaching tide of enemy men. Rain slicked the stones underfoot. Arya was kept inside under guard, at Ned's insistence. She'd raged, but he refused to risk her on the walls. The Lannisters halted just beyond bow range. Sentries relayed that more men were forming ranks behind the initial lines, thousands, maybe the majority of Tywin's host. It was a grim sight, the steel glint of a disciplined army, far outnumbering the defenders if all were present. Minutes stretched. Then, with a flourish of horns, a small party of knights rode forward under a white banner of truce. Jon recognized a golden lion emblazoned on the surcoats of two men. One carried a trumpet, another held the banner. They stopped within hail of Riverrun's gate. A knight in gilded plate called out, voice echoing in the drizzle. Lord Tywin Lannister demands parley with Lord Eddard Stark. Will he come forth to speak? Ned, hearing the call, exchanged a look with Catelyn. She shook her head vigorously. It's a trap, he grimaced. I can't go beyond the walls, but perhaps I can speak from the gatehouse. I must at least hear them out. Catelyn wanted to protest, but he was already gesturing to the guards to help him. They escorted Ned up a short flight of stairs to the walkway above the gate. Rain pounded his cloak as he emerged. Jon, from an adjacent vantage, saw Ned leaning on his crutch, wincing at each step. The wind whipped his hair. Robb and Brynden Tully arrived from the watchtower, taking positions nearby. Archers lined the battlements, arrows knocked. Ready. Ned raised his voice over the wind. I am Eddard Stark. Speak. The knight below doffed his helm, revealing a head of pepper-gray hair. I am Ser Flemont Brax, sworn to Lord Tywin. My lord demands your immediate surrender and the release of Ser Jaime Lannister. Do so, and he pledges mercy to you and your wife, and any who lay down arms. Resist, and you face annihilation. Robb murmured a curse. Brynden glowered. Ned's face was set in stone. We will not yield, Ned called back. My daughter remains hostage in King's Landing. We have offered a fair trade, Jaime for Sansa. Tywin refuses it. So be it. We are prepared to fight. Ser Flemont's horse stamped at the rain-soaked ground. Lord Tywin says you have no guarantee the girl lives. Surrender now or he begins the siege. A hiss of breath escaped Robb. Bastards, he muttered. Brynden shook his head in disgust. Ned's voice carried, tight with rage. If you harm one hair on Sansa's head, Jaime Lannister dies. You may tell Tywin that from me. Let him weigh his son's life against my daughter's. A flicker of uncertainty crossed Ser Flemont's face. Very well, but you cannot hold out forever, Stark. Lord Tywin's forces are many. You have perhaps half his number behind those walls. Ned responded in a freezing tone. We have enough to ensure you pay dearly for each stone of Riverrun. Tell Tywin we stand resolute. No release without Sansa's freedom. Ser Flemont's gaze swept the battlements, seeing archers ready to rain death if he advanced. He replaced his helm. Then we are at an impasse. May the gods pity your souls. He wheeled his horse, returning to the Lannister lines. Moments later, horns blared once more. The Lannister host advanced in stages, establishing a ring around Riverrun. The watchers on the ramparts saw squads move to the fords, bridging them with timbers. Others erected pavilions for the lords. More men marched around to the southern banks, sealing the fortress in a blockade from every direction. Within hours, a sea of red and gold tents dotted the horizon, and the black silhouettes of siege engines under construction rose. The siege had begun. Rob's knuckles whitened on the rampart stones. "They're building catapults or trebuchets," he observed. "We'll see if the walls hold." Brynden Tully spat. "We have thick walls, moats, and the confluence of the rivers. Let them come. But it's going to be a slow strangulation if they just camp out there." Ned turned from the edge, leaning on his crutch. Catelyn had come up behind him, pale-faced. "We are truly besieged," she said softly. Ned bowed his head. "Yes, now we must endure. If they think to starve us out, we'll see how well they fare in the rains. Perhaps Roose Bolton's riders can harass their supply lines. Without supplies, Tywin can't maintain a siege forever." Catelyn's eyes shone with tears she struggled to hold back. "This could last weeks, months. Sansa. Gods know what they're doing to her in King's Landing." Ned gently set a hand on her shoulder. "We must hope our threat keeps her alive. They want Jaime, so killing her gains them nothing." Yet the doubt in his voice betrayed how uncertain he was. That night, the fires of the Lannister army glowed like a ring of malevolent stars surrounding Riverrun. From the battlements, one could see torches, hear the distant clang of metal as siege machines were assembled. The defenders tried to rest in shifts, but every hour, horns or drumbeats from Tywin's lines stirred them. It was a campaign of intimidation, a slow clamp of the noose. Arya again tried to climb the walls, but the guards ushered her back. She seethed and threatened to carve them like training dummies, but they held firm under Ned's orders. Reluctantly, she retreated to her father's chamber. Meanwhile, Jon joined a small group of archers in case of a night raid. None came, but anxiety gnawed at them all. By dawn, the Lannisters had ringed the fortress fully, placing watchtowers at intervals, building earthen ramparts facing the castle. More men arrived from the western roads, likely reinforcements. Riverrun now lay firmly under siege. Ned moved about the courtyard on his crutch, encouraging the defenders. "Stand fast," he told them. "We are the North and the Riverlands united. Lord Tywin cannot break our will if we hold strong." Yet inside he fought despair. Time was not on their side. A night passed. Every day, the Lannister camp grew thicker with men, the ring of steel unbroken. They tried a few probing assaults, small detachments feigning an approach on the northern walls, easily repulsed by arrow fire. No large-scale attack came. Tywin was content to starve them, it seemed. Inside Riverrun, rations were cut. The refugees bemoaned the lack of bread. Horses were conserved for cavalry if the gates ever had to open. Men fished from the river as best they could, but the Lannisters had posted archers on the far banks, making it dangerous. Disease threatened if the latrines overflowed. The Tully stewards set strict rules for sanitation, hoping to avoid a plague. Catelyn grew thinner, her eyes shadowed by sleepless nights. Arya scowled at every passing guard, a restless predator caged. Robb tried to keep morale up among the men, leading training drills, but he confessed to Jon that he felt powerless. Ned's leg wound improved slowly, though he walked with a limp. He spent hours drafting letters that never left the castle, as ravens attempting to break the siege risked being shot down. They had no word from Bolton, no response from King's Landing. It felt like the realm had abandoned them. A fortnight into the siege, a rumor spread that Tywin might attempt a direct assault soon. Scouts atop the towers reported new siege towers being built, and catapults tested by flinging rocks into the river. Tension soared. The defenders readied boiling oil, sharpened every arrow, braced timbers behind the gates. Ned, Robb, and Brynden Tully took positions on the ramparts. At sunrise on the 16th day, the horns sounded across the Lannister lines. Dozens of siege towers began to roll forward through the mud, each tower bristling with archers. Catapults lurched, lobbing stones that crashed against Riverrun's walls. The defenders fired arrows in sheets, blackening the sky. Tywin's men hoisted ladders, trying to bridge moats or clamber onto ramparts. The first true assault of the siege had begun. Jon manned a vantage on the southwestern wall, commanding a small squad of archers. Rocks slammed into the battlements, sending shards of stone flying. Men cursed, Jon bellowed for them to keep firing. He loosed arrow after arrow, the string biting into his bracer. Below, the Lannisters pushed one of the siege towers through the muddy moat, boards laid across. Flames flickered where defenders hurled pots of pitch and torches. One tower caught fire, sending men leaping from the top. Another tower rumbled on, battered by rocks launched from Riverrun's own catapults. The clash reverberated across the fortress. From a corner of his vision, Jon saw the Great Jon leading a group of spearmen at the base of a collapsed section of walkway, throwing back Lannister assault squads that tried to scale ladders. Screams filled the air. Smoke billowed from multiple fires. Rain, ever present, slicked everything into a haze of mud and blood. Somewhere near the main gate, Ned and Robb coordinated the defense. A Lannister ram hammered the outer portcullis. Arrows rained down from the defenders, cutting down men at the ram, but fresh soldiers replaced them. The ram battered methodically. Crash, crash. The sound vibrated through the fortress. Catelyn watched anxiously from an upper rampart, as did Arya, who had slipped past the guards in the chaos. Fear twisted her features, though she clutched needle as if to find courage in the blade. Jon fired until his quiver was nearly empty. Then he grabbed a spear from a fallen man and joined a cluster of soldiers who rushed to a breach in the parapet. Lannister men in half-burned tabards had gained a foothold on the walkway. Jon stabbed one through the thigh, forcing him to topple over the side. Another lunged with a sword, steel screeching. Jon barely parried. Pain flared in his stitched flank. He gritted his teeth, pivoted, and slammed the man with his shield, sending him tumbling down the ladder. Another wave of Lannisters tried to climb, but scalding oil poured from above, sending them shrieking into the moat.